Episode 39, titled Survival Analysis Concepts, What Time-to-Event Modeling Solves, the goal is to model time-to-event outcomes when simple labels miss timing, because many data X scenarios involve decisions where when something happens matters as much as whether it happens. A churn label alone tells you that a customer eventually left, but it does not tell you how long they stayed, and that difference changes retention strategy and expected value. A failure label alone tells you that equipment eventually failed, but it does not tell you how long it ran reliably or how risk increases with age, which changes maintenance planning. Survival analysis is the family of concepts that handles this time-to-event view in a way that respects incomplete observation and different follow-up periods, which is exactly what makes it valuable on the exam. The exam rewards you for recognizing when time-to-event framing is appropriate, for handling censoring correctly, and for interpreting outputs as curves and risk comparisons rather than as single labels. This episode will define events, censoring, hazard, and the survival function in plain language, then connect those concepts to practical uses like retention programs and reliability planning. The goal is to give you a clear mental model that keeps you from making the classic mistake of treating censored cases as negatives. When you can speak survival analysis in simple terms, you can answer scenario questions about timing and incomplete data with confidence. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to the Data X books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. An event is the occurrence you care about, such as churn, failure, conversion, relapse, or any other defined outcome that happens at some time after a starting point. In survival analysis, you defined a clear origin time, like account creation, product installation, or first visit, and then you measure how long it takes until the event occurs. The exam often frames this as time until churn or time until failure, and the key is that you are modeling duration, not just classification. Events must be defined precisely, because a vague event definition can make timing ambiguous and can lead to inconsistent measurement across cases. In operational settings, event definitions can include thresholds, such as defining failure as performance dropping below a specific level, or defining conversion as completing a purchase rather than merely clicking. The event is not the time. The event is the occurrence that ends the survival time, which is why the same event can happen at different times for different entities. Data X rewards clear event definition because survival analysis depends on consistent timing measurement and consistent event meaning. Censoring is the concept that you do not always observe the event time, even though you observe some portion of the timeline, and that partial observation still contains valuable information. A censored case is one where you know the event has not occurred up to a certain time, but you do not know when it will occur after that time, if it occurs at all. This is common in customer data because some customers are still active at the time you end the observation period. And it is common in equipment data because some machines have not failed yet when you stop measuring. The exam rewards understanding censoring because it is the main reason survival analysis exists as a separate framework from simple classification or regression. If you ignore censoring, you throw away information or mislabel cases, which leads to biased risk estimates and misleading conclusions. Censoring also allows you to incorporate different follow-up durations fairly because not every entity enters the dataset at the same time or stays observed for the same length. When you treat censoring as, "We know survival up to here, but not beyond," you are using the concept correctly. Hazard is the instantaneous risk of the event at a given time, which is a way of describing how event likelihood changes as time passes. In plain language, hazard answers, how risky is it right now, given the entity has survived so far, which is different from the overall probability of the event. Hazard can increase with time, such as equipment becoming more likely to fail as it ages, or it can decrease, such as customers being less likely to churn once they pass an initial onboarding period. The exam may describe risk changing over time, and hazard is the concept that captures that dynamic. Hazard is not a probability of the event happening eventually. It is a local risk rate at a moment, conditioned on survival up to that moment. This is why hazard is useful for intervention timing, because if hazard spikes at a certain age, that is where preventive maintenance or retention outreach may be most effective. DataX rewards hazard intuition because it makes time-to-event modeling actionable. You can identify when risk is high, not just that risk exists. The survival function is the probability that the event has not occurred by a given time, which provides a direct and intuitive way to summarize time-to-event behavior. If you choose a time horizon, the survival function tells you what fraction of the population is expected to remain event-free beyond that point. In customer terms, it can answer, what fraction of customers are still active after 3 months? And in reliability terms, it can answer, what fraction of units survive past 1,000 hours? The survival function typically decreases over time, because as time passes, more events occur, and the remaining event-free fraction shrinks. The exam may describe survival curves, retention curves, or reliability curves, and these are all survival function ideas expressed visually. This function is valuable because it communicates timing without collapsing everything into a single number, and it naturally supports percentiles like median survival time. DataX rewards survival function understanding because it is the core output many stakeholders can interpret, a curve that shows how survival declines over time. Right censoring is the most common censoring type in business and operational datasets, and it occurs when observation ends before the event occurs. This is typical when the study period ends, when a customer is still active, or when a machine is still running at last inspection, meaning you know the event time is beyond the last observed time, but you do not know its exact value. The exam may describe that some customers are still subscribed, or that some equipment has not yet failed, and these are right censoring cues. Right censoring is important because it preserves partial truths. A customer who has not churned by 6 months has provided 6 months of survival information, even if you do not know what happens later. Treating right-censored cases as if the event never happens or as if they are negatives can bias estimates toward overly optimistic survival because you would be ignoring future risk. Survival analysis methods incorporate right-censored cases properly, using them to count time at risk without counting an event. DataX rewards right censoring because it guides the correct modeling approach and prevents a classic interpretive error. Survival methods become especially valuable when follow-up durations differ widely because simple labels and naive averages can become biased under uneven observation. If some entities have been observed for years and others for weeks, then comparing raw event counts without accounting for time at risk is misleading. Survival analysis addresses this by modeling event timing while accounting for different exposure durations, which is crucial for fair comparisons across cohorts. The exam may describe cohorts entering at different times, uneven monitoring windows, or incomplete follow-up, and those are cues that survival methods are appropriate. In such settings, survival curves can be compared across groups to understand whether one group experiences events earlier, later, or at different rates. The key is that survival analysis does not require everyone to be observed to the end. It uses partial observation efficiently and fairly. DataX rewards selecting survival methods in these scenarios because it shows you understand how to handle incomplete timelines without discarding information. When you recognize uneven follow-up as a signal for survival analysis, you are using time-to-event thinking correctly.
A common and dangerous mistake is treating censored cases as negatives, because censored cases are not evidence that the event will not occur, but evidence that has not occurred yet by the last observed time.
If you label a right-censored customer as non-churn and treat it as a final outcome, you are implicitly assuming the customer will never churn, which is rarely the intended meaning.
This error creates bias, especially when the observation period is short, because many censored cases would later become events if you observed longer.
The exam may present a scenario where someone proposes labeling all non-events as negatives, and the correct response is to explain that censoring means unknown timing, not negative outcome.
Proper survival analysis uses censoring as a partial observation, keeping the time-at-risk information while acknowledging uncertainty about the eventual event time. This is why survival frameworks exist, because they prevent you from throwing away incomplete timelines or mislabeling them.
DataX rewards avoiding the censoring as negative mistake because it is a core conceptual test of survival analysis literacy.
When you can state that censored cases are not negatives, you are aligned with correct methodology.
Survival thinking is useful for retention programs and reliability planning because it focuses on timing, which is what determines when you should intervene and how you should allocate resources. In retention, knowing that churn risk spikes in the first month can justify onboarding improvements and early outreach, while knowing that risk is steady over time can support different strategies. In reliability, knowing that hazard increases sharply after a certain operating age can justify preventative maintenance schedules and inventory planning for replacements. The exam may describe decisions about when to contact customers or when to service equipment, and survival analysis concepts provide the framework to reason about those decisions. Survival curves and hazard shapes translate directly into actionable policies, such as service intervals or customer lifecycle interventions. This is also why survival methods are valuable when you have incomplete observation, because you can still plan based on partial truths rather than waiting for every unit to fail or every customer to churn. DataX rewards this application because it shows you can connect statistical concepts to operational decisions. When you interpret survival outputs as guidance for timing interventions, you are using the method as intended. Survival outputs are often interpreted as curves and risk ratios rather than as single labels, and the exam expects you to be comfortable with that conceptual output form. A survival curve shows the fraction remaining event-free over time, and comparing curves across groups shows timing differences, such as one cohort churning earlier than another. Risk ratios, in concept, compare hazard levels between groups, indicating whether one group has higher instantaneous risk at a given time, which supports policy decisions and segmentation. You do not need to compute these ratios for most exam questions, but you should understand that survival analysis often compares groups in terms of relative risk over time. This is why survival analysis is used for cohort comparison, because it respects different follow-up durations and timing information. The exam may ask what kind of output you would expect or how to communicate results, and a curve-based interpretation is often the correct answer. Curves also naturally connect to percentiles, such as median time to event, which stakeholders can interpret as a time-based benchmark. DataX rewards this because it expects you to think in time-based summaries, not in static labels. Survival analysis also connects to time-varying features and covariates, because risk can change not only with time itself, but with changing conditions experienced by the entity. In customer settings, Engagement metrics, support interactions, and usage patterns can evolve over time, and those changes can influence churn risk dynamically. In equipment settings, operating conditions like temperature, load, and maintenance history can change, influencing failure risk in ways that are not captured by baseline features alone. The exam may describe features that change over time and ask what modeling approach accommodates that reality. And survival thinking supports the idea of time-varying covariates. This is a reminder that time-to-event modeling is not only about the clock. It is also about how changing states influence hazard. Even if you do not name a specific model, you should recognize that survival analysis can incorporate covariance and that risk can be updated as new information arrives. DataX rewards this because it reflects real-world systems where risk is dynamic, not static. When you can say that covariates can vary over time and influence hazard, you are reasoning at the right level. Communicating survival results should focus on expected time and risk differences because stakeholders need to understand what the curves imply for planning and intervention. Instead of saying a model predicts churn, you can say it estimates how long until churn is likely and how that timing differs across segments. Instead of saying a machine will fail, you can say it estimates survival probability over the next period and how hazard changes with operating age. This communication style avoids false certainty because survival analysis outputs are probabilistic and reflect uncertainty, especially with censoring. The exam often rewards answers that emphasize uncertainty bounds and curve-based thinking because it aligns with the broader DataX theme of honest uncertainty communication. It also supports decision-making because timing-based probabilities can be tied to costs, such as expected revenue remaining or expected downtime risk. When you communicate survival results as timing and risk differences, you make the analysis actionable without pretending it is deterministic. DataX rewards this because it reflects mature, stakeholder-aware reasoning. A useful anchor for this episode is that survival tracks time, and censoring preserves partial truths because it captures why the framework exists. Survival analysis is about time to event, not just event presence, and that time dimension changes the questions you can answer and the decisions you can support. Censoring is the reality that you often do not observe the full timeline, but you still have valuable information up to the point of last observation. This anchor helps you avoid the censoring as negative mistake because it reminds you that censored cases contribute time and partial truth, not a final outcome label. It also helps you recognize when survival analysis is the right tool, namely when follow-up durations differ and timing matters. Under exam pressure, this anchor keeps your reasoning aligned with the core concepts and prevents simplistic classification thinking from taking over. DataX rewards this because it is a high-leverage conceptual distinction that drives correct method selection. To conclude episode 39, identify the event, censoring, and goal for one scenario, because this is the exam move that turns a story into a correct modeling choice. Choose a scenario like customer churn in a subscription service, equipment failure in a fleet, or time to conversion in a campaign, and state the event clearly. Then state where censoring appears, such as customers still active at the end of observation, or machines still running at last inspection, and emphasize that these are unknown timing cases, not negatives. Next, state the goal, such as estimating survival probability over time, identifying when hazard spikes, or comparing cohorts in terms of time to event risk. Finally, explain that survival analysis is appropriate because it preserves partial information and produces curve-based outputs that support timing decisions. If you can narrate event, censoring, and goal cleanly, you will handle Data X questions about time-to-event modeling with calm, correct, and professionally defensible reasoning.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.